Hey everybody, it's Dr. Karen here, and I have been getting some questions about what is inside the Word Study Toolkit for SLPs, and I wanted to do a quick video tour to just walk you through what is in this resource. So the purpose of this is to provide a resource that will help you to study morphology and orthography and really understand how to break those down and just really give you a go-to resource that you can use to have a number of different morphemes and orthographic concepts that you can study with your students to improve their vocabulary and also include their spelling and reading skills. So obviously we know that phonological awareness is one thing that we can do to boost our students' spelling skills, but our students also need to know how to break words down that have multiple morphemes. So we need to go beyond phonology and really show our students the meaning behind those words and dig into morphology, which in turn helps us to study orthography with your students and to really help them understand why words are spelled the way they are so they can see those patterns. So I'm going to just scroll through really quickly here. So obviously there's just the title page here and then the overview of what's included. So at the beginning, I just give you some definitions in part one of just some of those key concepts that you want to know when you're studying these things with your students. And this can also be helpful to share with the students themselves or with anyone else who is working with the students, like teachers, literacy interventionists, even parents. So as we break this down even further, we get into all of the different parts of words. So we have prefixes, we have roots and bases, we have suffixes, and then we also have things like multiple meaning words, homonyms, homophones, homographs, and then obviously some resources that you can link to at the end and just some references so you know where some of this information came from. So this first part here is just a key that explains what all of these things are in all of the different sections. And this can be helpful for your understanding, but also you can actually be more explicit than you think with your students. So you can actually use some of these terms with your students when you're explaining them. So here's some of those other terms that I have covered here. So that's what's in that first section. It makes a good handout, and you can sometimes even print this page off and give to people who are working with your students so that they can have an understanding of some of the things that you're doing in therapy. And then here's just some more of that guide. And then also we've got some cue cards here. So what this does is it just breaks some of these things down even further in the quick guide here and gives you some more in-depth explanations and examples of all of those things that are in that quick guide in the front, just to help elaborate a little bit more and to help people understand all of those different concepts. And these are really, it seems like we're getting into the nitty-gritty here, which we are, and it's really important because kids have to, in order for them to understand why words are spelled the way they are, we've got to be pulling out those parts, and we've got to be doing it accurately, because what happens sometimes is that what people will do is that we'll look at a word and try to pull it apart for our students, and we might be pulling apart pieces of words that aren't necessarily linguistically accurate and might not be a legitimate unit in a word. So we want to make sure that when we're taking chunks of words that we're doing it accurately, because that's what's going to help our students to really make those connections between those patterns. So we want to make sure when we're taking little chunks of words and helping our students remember that those chunks go together, we want to make sure that we're actually pulling out real morphemes, real linguistic units, not just random words that happen to be, or not just random letters that happen to be next to each other. So for example, like in this word right here, or happens to be there, which is a word, but in this specific situation, it's not a meaningful unit. It's just two letters that happen to be together. So that is an example of that. And so we just have some more examples here of those other terms that I've mentioned in the quick guide at the beginning. So then we get into the prefixes. So in this part, we have a bunch of different prefixes, and what we've got here is the prefix on this end, and then the meaning of the prefix, and then an example of that prefix being used. Obviously not an exhaustive list of prefixes, and not the only words that include that prefix, but this gives you some examples here. So we've got all those word lists, so think of that as a key, and then we also have flashcards of all of those different prefixes that were in the list. So you can either just take a look at this list and then write these prefixes down on a piece of paper when you're actually studying them with your students, or you could actually use these flashcards. It just gives you some flexibility as far as how you want to use this resource. So a question I get with a lot of these lists is, what order should I start in? I would say, so people always want, with these word lists, people always want to know some type of hierarchy and developmental sequence. But the thing is, with vocabulary and language, there really isn't one. There really isn't a set list that's like, do these words in this order. The way that I tend to categorize my word lists and resources is I look at what kids are being exposed to, because what we found with school age language development is that across that hierarchy, what highly informs what kids are able to do and what they know is really what they've been exposed to. So there's not this neat little linear guideline as far as do this first, but what you want to do is honestly just pick the ones that you think are most common for your students. You might have to play around with it a little bit. Maybe that involves just looking at some of the words that are coming up a lot in their curriculum and prioritizing with some of those prefixes. So, pick the ones that you think are most common, start with those, and then add to it. So that's how the prefixes look. I'm just going to scroll through really quickly. And then once I get to the end of that, then we've got the same thing for roots and bases. There are, with these types of units, there are sometimes different meanings to the word. And the thing is that a lot of times when you add a different morpheme at the end, so if you add a suffix at the end, it will change the actual class of the word. So I've got some different examples there, whether it has a meaning that could be a noun and a verb, or a verb and an adjective. So I've got a bunch of different possible meanings there. So again, similar format. We've got all of the definitions up here, and then the flashcards down here. Now you'll notice that sometimes the spelling will actually be different for some of these morphemes when you actually put it into a word. Sometimes if there is an E at the end, you'll take off that E when you add the suffix at the end. So be mindful of that. Sometimes there are you have to tweak the spelling a little bit when you put multiple morphemes on it, but the meaning should stay the same. So that is something that stays similar even if you are adding different morphemes onto the word. All right, same format here. We've got the suffixes. So this is morphemes that go on the end of the word. And this is one that I really like to point out, this one here, because it's common for people to think that T-I-O-N or C-I-O-N or S-I-O-N are the actual morpheme, but with this one, the actual morpheme is just I-O-N. If you actually look at words that have T-I-O-N or S-I-O-N, really that S or that T usually goes at the end of the previous morpheme. So usually it'll go at the end of that verb. So we don't want to tack that letter like the S or the T onto this one because it just confuses kids. So we want them to be able to see accurately what are those different units in words. Because if we just try to tack together patterns, again, words and letters that just happen to go together, then it can be confusing. Last section here, we've got actually, these are the suffix cards. Going to scroll through that. Then we've got the homophones, homophones, homographs, and homonyms. So similar thing here. We've got a list of them, and then we've got the actual resources here. And you can see how that's laid out. And that same thing follows to the end. And then at the end here, I've just got my reference list and some links, some things that you can link out to get more information. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share a link below this video that you can follow to purchase the Word Study Toolkit so that you can get this resource to help your students build their spelling, reading, and vocabulary skills. As always, you can email me with questions at talktome@drkarenspeech.com. But thanks so much for watching.